So we're moving into lesson 3 of this environment, and it talks about, so what are the phases of a Lync Server 2013 deployment? Because for most customers, it won't simply be install the product and expect it to work for everything and expect it to meet all your business needs. Then we're talking a little bit more about that brick model approach, what that sequence is in that deployment, how you deploy that environment, how you would convert your business drivers into design decisions. A little bit, we're trying to coach you and help you have those stakeholder discussions and who are the right stakeholders to bring in and participate in your design phases. And then lastly is, Brian and I are going to talk a little bit about what user education means and why it's so important in the Lync environment.
Right, and this is important, and you'll know it's important to Microsoft. They've actually got a program specifically designed to help you get through this process of conceptualizing it, moving it to a POC,
Yep.
or to a pilot,
to a full
deployment,
rollout,
to going forward, and then kind of like this circular event of
Yep.
reevaluate, see how things go. And we'll get into that discussion a little bit later.
and probably a lot more when you do the session with Rui.
Oh, yes. And keep in mind that there are concepts that are here within the design that are very consultative, very, you may say, well, that's not what I do. I'm not a consultant. I work full-time for my employer, blah, blah, blah. However, everything you do is consulting your employee.
It's internal consulting at that point.
Right, you are still doing this exact same process, or should be doing this exact same process for any rollout, whether it's a quick thing because you're 10 people, which you're probably not rolling it out, to you're rolling it out to 50,000 users, and we need to really think about and test and design and find out how people work. So
Right,
this is an important section.
Exactly. That's the other piece of this is you may think that you can roll this product out as simply a install it kind of feature. And really what we're finding and what we want to encourage you to do is recognize that running through these phases gets you a better end result.
That's right. Yeah, we don't want you to fail. We don't want the product to fail. And if there's not planning involved, typically what we're seeing is people think the product doesn't work.
Yep.
And it does, it's just not deployed correctly.
Yep. So in a Lync deployment, we really see this as a 5-phase rollout, sort of the 5 phases: envision, plan, stabilize, deploy, and operate. That operate being that ongoing phase of your environment. So in that envision phase, we do that look at the initial state of your current environment. We talk about what is our theoretical end state of the environment and what are the scenarios that get us there. Right? In the plan phase, we really dig into the nitty-gritty of what are the infrastructure requirements of our environment, what are the Lync server requirements. So how can we convert a Lync or an infrastructure requirement to meet a Lync requirement, and how can we work those two things together? Planning external access and planning enterprise voice are the 2 of the biggest pieces that happen here.
That's right. And when we're going through this entire phase deployment, this could be run 3 or 4 times during a deployment, because when you get into the initial design, you can say, you know what, we're starting with instant messaging. That's all we're doing. We're going to plan it, we're going to design it, we're going to deploy it, and then we're going to operate and make sure that everything's stable. And then we run the whole process over again, because now we're doing external access or enterprise voice or conferencing.
Yep.
And when you can layer these things in, policy allows us to turn things off completely. The client reflects those policies.
Yep.
So it's not anything that's isn't what you'd expect it to be from a client endpoint perspective. So keep that in mind. This doesn't have to be an all or nothing.
Most definitely. Good to remember. So testing considerations in your stabilized phase. That is, how do you want to pull your testing plan together? How do you want to do your testing? Are you testing in production? Are you testing in test? Are you doing testing to scale? Are you doing, what can you test in your environment? Especially when you're getting an enterprise voice, I find that a lot of customers can't test PBX integration because they only have one PBX.
Right. And obviously, it can't be said enough. The more you test, the more you know. The more you know, the better the rollout. So whatever you can do within
the bounds of
what
reasonable,
you have, let's go ahead and do it. Test whatever you can.
Yep. Proof of concepts are great. Tests are great. Staged rollouts, they really help you get that Lync server environment deployed and deployed well. In that, again, now we're getting into that deploy phase. Just like Exchange, just like Lync 2010, we have to prepare your Active Directory, we have to build your topology, we have to deploy your Lync server pools. configure archiving and monitoring, set up external access, deploy clients. There's this big, long sort of sequence of how you build all those pieces. And then in operate, this is about consuming those monitoring reports that you've got out there, maintaining the environment, patching it, patching the certificates, maintaining and managing the client experience, and troubleshooting.
Yeah, and we actually have a module specifically on maintaining and monitoring and managing. And there's an interesting section within it that I think Microsoft has gone beyond what they typically go and giving you ideas on how and what you should maintain. And we'll get into that obviously when we get to that module, but things what you should be doing weekly, monthly, bi-monthly, annually, all kinds of stuff to say how does this product need to operate? Because once this product, Lync 2013, becomes your phone system, becomes your conferencing bridges, becomes
it's
the
critical
key.
to your
critical.
phone. It's
That's
critical
right.
to your business process.
This becomes something you cannot play around with. And again, with 2013, our DR solution's better, our HA's better. We'll get all into that, and it can be your system of communications. So
Yep, most definitely. So we've talked about it previously that Lync 2013 has moved into a brick model. The big thing to remember here is the drivers that took the Lync product there. We saw SQL as a bottleneck, preventing those larger and bigger pools, more pools that could handle more users. So what they did was they took some of those core capabilities that the back end used to provide and moved those onto the front end. So you'll see that the front end, in fact, has a lot higher requirements than it did in 2010. A lot of that is due to the different roles that it plays, as well as the SQL Server product that's deployed on it.
and the big thing people would be asking in the front end world is how did we go from a approximate 10,000 user sizing model to 6,500 or 6,400 user
66, 67.
on the, and that's where your gap is. The box is doing more, even with bigger hardware and processors. It's doing a significant amount more data, but the end result is a better sizing, availability, and we'll again get into more of that. So
Yep. So when we get into this brick model, it's the idea that the front end is now the arbiter of user state, rather than the back end being that in 2010. And it is definitely a key thing to remember in your test, and that the front end and the back end are much more loosely coupled from a presence point of view than they were in 2010. And then we use this idea of lazy writes to enable those DR and rehydration features. If your front end goes down in a large enough pool, we want to make sure we have multiple copies of your data so that when you come up on another server, that's reflected.
Yep.
And how this is sort of done is through this idea of user groups. It's that your entire user base is broken up into user groups automatically by the environment, and each user group is assigned to 3 different front ends in your pool. 3 copies of that group's data are stored on those 3 front ends through replication through the Windows fabric. And then if a front end dies, all those user groups are automatically transitioned to that secondary server.
And it's also important to know this isn't something that you can control. It's not something that you can manage per se. And the servers are doing it all automatically in the background. You may be in a server group and on 3 servers, and then next week, based off provision, any changes, you may be on 3 different. Who knows, right? Things are going to automatically take care of themselves. So the important part is to know that 1, we leverage Windows Fabric, and 2, that it just happens. It's just part of the magic.
You can monitor it. So there are some PowerShell commandlets, and there are some tools you've got as a Lync administrator to be able to get in there and see
where you're at,
see where you live or where another user lives.
But yeah, so you can know, but you can't do anything about it.
Yep.
So that's what it is. So.
But it is sometimes good to know.
Yep.
And then we've got this idea that we now, because of that Windows Fabric, we now have the idea of a quorum of servers in a Lync front end pool, and we have this idea that we also have a minimum number of servers necessary to start the pool to prevent those split brain scenarios. So, and then scale out. That's rather than scale up the servers further, we scale out simply by adding additional front ends into that pool.
Adding another brick.
Up to 12, which is an improvement over 2010.
Yep.
So we've talked about this a little already. It's how we order the Lync Server 2013 deployment, what that sort of looks like. And what we see most customers doing, and sort of is the approach that we get the most success with, is starting with your internal deployment, rolling out your dial-in conferencing, rolling out your external deployment, and finally rolling out your enterprise voice and PBX integrations.
That's right. And again, this is what we commonly see. This isn't, you could very well be it. Internal's got to start. You've got to actually have the box.
Sure.
But beyond that, it is theoretical that you could do external.
You could turn on, and for some conferencing scenarios, you may want to turn on external access before you turn in dial-in conferencing.
That's right. And maybe dial-in conferencing isn't a key component at this phase in your deployment. Well, great. I mean, again, there's nothing hard set on how you do this. More important is that you are phasing it, that you don't try to just turn everything on at once and expect everything to work. From a troubleshooting perspective, nightmare. From a feature acceptance, nightmare. Everything just becomes a nightmare. Just slowly phase this thing in. Slowly deploy it, slowly move, slowly test. And that's the stress points that we have here. So.
It should be noted with Lync Server 2013, same as 2010, you can't integrate the on-premise deployment with a third-party audio conferencing provider. It is expected that Lync will be providing the audio and dial-in conferencing for any Lync-hosted conferences. Whereas with the cloud, you can.
Yeah. Wow.
You can integrate with a third-party ACP for your O365 deployment.
And moving forward, you may have to if you want to.
Yep. We're starting to get a little bit into what Brian and Rui will spend a couple of days talking about in a couple of weeks here, but it's about talking and converting those business drivers into architecture and design decisions. Does the organization require presence and messaging, right? These are the questions you sort of ask yourself about when you are designing and deploying Lync. Do we need to use conferencing? Do you want external people to participate in it? Do you expect to use enterprise voice features? Are you going to have a lot of remote or work from home users or traveling users who need those full capabilities? Are you going to get those presence and click to dial things in your existing telephony world? Are you going to build those things into some of the additional business processes? Right?
I agree. And this is where you drive, how many people do I have? Where are these people at? How important is voice survivability? How important is conferencing survivability? Maybe an SBA or an SBS isn't enough, even though I've only got 200 people. Yep. Maybe I need an SE. I mean, this is, let the business needs drive the design. Don't make the design
drive the business. Exactly.
You really need to do it the right way.
Yeah, because the other piece of this to think about is if the business is asking for it, right, it's because the business thinks it's critical to the business, and therefore they're going to pay for it.
Right.
And then again, you want to answer those questions and indicate those various scenarios and the Lync functionality that's required to be able to implement those things based on those user models that you've identified.
Mm-hmm.
Stakeholder participation. This is everybody in your IT organization, right? This is everybody. This is your upper management. This is your network people, because you're going to be impacting their network. Your server people, your client desktops, your user education. Wait, you mean you need to educate your users?
Very important to educate. And some people within the product team would say it's the most important. So, and we'll get a little into that.
Yeah. Operations, your telephony folks.
It's really even your users. So this is everybody. This is the organization gets involved in this deployment. Right?
And in those participating in those stakeholder meetings.
That's right. Because if you don't have representation from a user perspective on different user types, and again, keep in mind, just because you have...
IT may not know.
IT knows stuff and acts and does things different than perhaps an administrative assistant acts and has needs, versus HR may do things completely different than the people down in accounting. So having the representations of the various user types and what their functions and needs are in the environment is extremely important to make sure that this is rolled out correctly. And if nothing else, your POC should flush a lot of that out.
Most definitely. And when we get into this, is that user education. Why is Lync a product that requires user education?
It's funny because we were talking about this the other day, that I rolled out Lync to a client backwards, and somewhat on purpose. It was kind of just a pushing it in the door to say, enticing them. Look what this product is. It's awesome. Try it out. And got key IT, which then kind of, unfortunately, molded its way into upper management, which kind of, it's the crack of Microsoft products. One person uses it, the next uses it, people start pushing it throughout the organization. That was all great and fine, but now nobody knew how to use it, and functionality wasn't being exploited. That's where end user education comes into play. People don't know what they don't know, and it's not their fault that they didn't realize, oh, you mean I can just drag a user from my contact list over into an existing conversation? I don't have to go and add user and going through the process. It's that simple stuff that if they don't get the teachings, especially at the get-go, either bad habits form or frustrations start to exist.
Yeah,
where we don't want that.
Why does this product take so many clicks to interact and join a conference when we know that they don't really need that many?
Right, and it's really important to get that education in, whether it's train the trainer and you want a group of users to be trained by whomever is going to provide the training, and then they roll that out to the end user, or mass end user. I've been involved in both, where
CBTs, where you get tent cards that are laid down for the users as you roll this out.
And if you go to the web, you'll find quick access guides and cards and things Microsoft's produced.
Speaking of the web, there's this. So one of the things is the Lync Rollout and Adoption Success Kit, and we'll make sure that there is a kit, and we'll make sure we get that rollout and adoption kit in the links for the course.
Right, and the RASC is something that a lot of effort has been put into from the product team to make sure that people understand the entire process from envisioning to deployment to operating it, and keeping all of the wheels working and moving and the correct people involved. And so, if nothing else, even if you don't think you need it, you need it to just make sure you don't miss something.
Yeah, no, it's a really good checklist. It's a really good set of processes. It's a lot of education. It's a lot of end user communication that you can use and customize for your deployment. So we're getting into talking about what it takes to assess your infrastructure requirements and update your design from Lync 2010 to Lync 2013. And we're going to, over the next few slides, we're going to talk about this range of topics, from what a Lync design needs to encompass, what those required SIP domains are, how you're going to integrate with Exchange, what your voice requirements are, how you're going to update those, and then really, it really is important that you document these things.
Very important.
In any sort of deployment of scale, it's going to be definitely a huge key.
Yeah, especially when there's multiple users and moving parts. Now, if you're your IT of your 200 people and you own and do everything, it's nice to have documentation should you leave the company or something happen to you in an emergency.
Get hit by the lottery bus.
Yeah, that's never a great thing. Well, I guess not great for the company, great for you, but as the case may be, having documentation adds value more than you think. Having the ability to be able to say, I'm unavailable, but here's the doc that walks you right through what things are and anybody could pick up is extremely important from a supporting it as well as upgrading this whole process now. If you've got it through 2010 doc, this is a much easier process to go to 2013.
Most definitely. So in that 2013 design, we need to take those business drivers that we've turned into technical requirements, and we need to document those. The idea is we want to then create that conceptual design, transform that conceptual design into a logical design, logical describing all the physical pieces that have to go in, implement those physical pieces that meet that logical design, refine the physical one, because that's a big key to deploying Lync successfully, is that you both deploy it as well as continue to monitor it and make sure it's performing the way you expect and the way you predicted. And then reviewing that design at the end, right? This is a product that really will benefit from even a successful project having a postmortem. So this is talking about what are the required SIP domains in your environment, and do you need to update that from 2010 with the new capabilities of the hybrid model? Are, in your 2010 environment, did you have 3 SIP domains, but were they all really used by anybody? Is that important to continue pursuing when you're setting up the hybrid? One thing you have to recognize is, by setting up hybrid, each of those SIP domains You really only can pick one and hybridize with one tenant.
Yeah, so the tenant's tied to a domain namespace, right? And a single domain namespace. And it's important to, we've always stressed, you'll be best off having your SIP match your email domain from just linking up and right-clicking and user management, especially with external access.
Most definitely.
But that can be something that actually doesn't happen, or there's a change in email namespaces if you're going to do the hybrid mode. It's just something, again, keep in mind if you have multiple namespaces and multiple tenants or a tenant of Office 365 in the cloud, you're going to have limitations of what you're going to do. You just need to decide what makes sense from a business perspective and move forward if that's what makes sense. So.
Yep, most definitely. From an Exchange perspective, it's how are we going to integrate with Exchange? Are we integrating your on-prem Lync 2013 with an Exchange O365 tenant? Even if you aren't moving users there and splitting your Lync domain, you may rely on the Exchange roles in the cloud to provide your voicemail service. Because it still is the case that Exchange is the only voicemail provider available for a Lync 2013 or a 2010 environment.
Right, on-prem or cloud, that works just fine.
Yep.
The other way around, not so much. Lync in the cloud, Exchange on-prem, we don't support that. But Exchange UM
there's no voice in the cloud.
That's right. But Exchange UM works well.
Yeah.
I mean, it's got majority of the functionality and feature sets of on-prem, and if you have clients or yourself that have moved Exchange to the cloud, don't think you can't have Lync on-prem and interoperate. It works. It works
just fine. You get all the functionality. You get the voicemail delivered to your inbox. Heck, mine's like that at Microsoft.
There you go.
So, client integration. This is talking about making sure you understand what the features and functionalities of the client that your end users are really consuming and taking capability of, but it's also making sure you understand what the software requirement is.
Which is a big deal here with 2013.
Lync 2013 as a client does not support Windows XP.
Or Vista. I'm not saying that, but if you were Vista, it wouldn't work. Windows 7 and greater, how's that? Yeah, and that has run into some challenges.
Good thing to note here is the Lync 2010 client, in fact, works against a Lync 2013 server. So if you're still one of those companies that has a lot of XP deployed, you're probably going to be in a position where you're not deploying the Lync 2013 client right off the bat.
Yeah, and to your point, a really big architectural change was the client backwards compatible and forwards compatible. So we can get the 2013 client, we can get the 2010 client, everything talking to the 2013 world. It doesn't matter. We don't care. So you don't have to upgrade the desktop prior to the server, or the server prior to the desktop. You can do whichever you want.
Yeah, there's a much more capable mix between those two clients. So, and it definitely is important for you to remember and look up the technical spec around what works and what doesn't between those client versions, because it sometimes is a little confusing. So keep it clear in your mind, not only as you're deploying it into your clients, but as you're taking the tests. So voice requirements. This is because we've made just incremental changes into the Lync environment for 2013. It's about talking about and integrating some of those incremental changes into your design. Since we now have those multiple trunking support and end-to-end gateway support and trunk-to-trunk routing, can Lync take a more central role in your voice infrastructure, whereas previously that might have been a gateway. You might need to upgrade gateways and SBA versions as you're deploying this, so it's good to know what's going on, and it really is good to understand your current dialing habits and dialing plans. It's entirely possible that you've rolled your deployment out with the intent to support 7-digit dialing, and in fact your end users are only ever using click to call.
Right. Or if they are dialing, they never dial 7-digit. It's always a 10-digit. Or knowing what people are dialing and catching it, because the end result is we want somebody that attempts to dial and attempts to make a call to make a successful call, if they're authorized to do so. And so it's figuring just out what do people do, how do they do it, where do they dial, are people still using 4-digit dialing, inter-office dialing, are they not, are they dialing by name, how and what, knowing your environment, otherwise you won't know what you don't know. And
that gets back to end users in your stakeholder meetings. So this is why do I document? Why should I document business and technical requirements? How do I document those things? And really, why should I get feedback and update those documents during your milestones? And this gets to the design process. This gets to, even as an internal IT person, you sometimes have to think of yourself as being a consultant to your own business.
And having, again, those documents and having the design will, in the end, help you help yourself. Especially when there's a lot of moving parts and projects within your organization, it can be difficult to remember how something was done or why something was done. That's a really key when people come back 6 months from now and say, why is this way? And you can go
Why
back to
didn't we
docs
turn
and say,
on conferencing?
well, because XYZ said this, and the decision was made by the group that this wasn't going to happen. I mean, that's what the documentation is for, to
The
help you.
networking team told us that the network infrastructure can't support conferencing today.
Right. Or it can only support peer-to-peer, too. So we limited it. We don't have as many streams. I mean, whatever the logic is, that's what the documentation is for. And making sure it's accurate is just as important as having the documentation. Because bad docs don't do you any good.
And that's why we talk about making
refining.
sure your key stakeholders get those documents and give you feedback as you're doing your deployment and your design.
Right.
So this is really talking about the MSF, the Microsoft Solution Framework, and this gets a little more into the nitty-gritty of how we operate those envision, plan, stabilize, build, deploy, operate phases. And it gets into this idea that there's this triangle, right? It's a fairly common representation of a way to have constraints described. You've got, in most Lync environments and Lync deployments, you'll in fact have really at least 3 competing constraints: your time, your features, your resources, your schedule, and your feature set. If we have unlimited features and all the resources in the world, right?
Do you have enough time?
We probably won't have enough time even then to do everything. But there's this balancing act that you've got to go through to get these things deployed. So,
yeah, and then when you look at the MSF evolution, you notice it's a wheel, and that's again a very common because it never stops. As soon as you deployed, then you're re-evaluating and re-operating and re-envisioning and adjusting, and it's a constant circle of services that continue forever, or should forever.
Yeah, and a lot of that is really just about understanding your Lync environment and continuing to operate it in the right way and keep it updated for your environment.
Yep.
So this is a little way to think about how you're doing a Lync design. It's when you're doing those envisioning things, do you normally involve the members from your operations team during your envisioning phases? The people who operate the existing infrastructure, do you bring them in when you're trying to talk to them about what should come?
If you want a successful deployment, it's really important. There's nobody you want on your team more friendly to you than your help desk and operations that are maintaining the environment. When the calls start pouring in and they're supporting this day one, you want them on your side. Bringing them in from the get-go and getting their buy-in is key to a successful project.
A lot of times it doesn't happen, though.
It's
true. We make those decisions at the business and the IT layers, and we don't think about what operations is doing and what they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis.
And their impact and everything that goes along with backing up and recovering and maintaining. And yeah, I mean, it's a big deal, and remembering them will make them very happy. So make sure you do remember them and bring them in as much as you can.
Most definitely. So when we talk about these critical success factors to your project, it really is that acceptance criteria, or the critical success factors of your deployment, get you to understand success, right?
Yeah, and that can be different. That can be individualized, and it should be individualized per deployment. So if your success factor is you rolled out the product, everybody logged in, that's it, that's your metric, great.
Meet it.
Make sure you hit that metric, and otherwise you're not going to hit your goals. But not having any knowledge of what that metric will be, you'll never know if you rolled out successfully. You won't know if you've done what you set out to do.
Right. You may never get to, as one of my favorite project managers ever said, have we defined done? If we don't define done, we'll never know if we got there. And then, as Brian was talking about, the fact that the MSF is that evolutionary wheel and it keeps running and keeps going on is this idea that it should let you and your project and your stakeholders not be confined to this rollout of the project and the product, but really think about this from a long term, about bringing all those things together and bringing those things for the long term for that product. We're walking through a few scenarios in here. And some of these things are really better reviewed by you in the long term, and they'll be used by you in a long-term architecture point of view. But this is, what are our different phases of the deployment in a sample scenario here, right? We've got this first phase is deployed internally. We provide for presence in IM and conferencing. We provide for audio, video, person-to-person audio, video. We turn on the external. We get Edge working. We get Federation set up. We deploy dial-in conferencing and Lync as a soft phone. And then we roll out and build those Lync features into our ERP and CRM systems. So functional spec, we've talked about this a little from a sort of a detailed design. We glazed over it a little. This is just giving you an idea of what we commonly see as consultants in a document we would describe as a functional spec. Sometimes you would see this as a detailed design. Not really going to go into that. It's for your reference as you're deploying and designing and building your document set.
And when you're looking at this, keep the what it should not include is important. It's the idea is the function. What is it supposed to provide functionally to the environment? We're not getting down in the nitty gritty. This is the envisioned design doc.
This isn't the spec for the
rollout. People that are implementing this isn't going to here you go.
This won't be a build guide.
Right. This is not, and it's really just the overarching conceptual guide to how we're going to design stuff.
Infrastructure requirements is what we're getting into now, and it's good to remember. Hardware recommendations, they went up.
Oh yeah, they went up significantly.
Right. We're looking for 12 cores of 2.26 gigahertz or higher, 64-bit processors, and 32 gigs of RAM to operate a front end. Right?
Yeah.
And not only that, but at least 8 10,000 RPM capable disks.
Right, and this gets back to, now keep in mind when Microsoft does their sizing guides, we're talking about a fully deployed and sized server.
Right, that's an 80,000 user pool on, but with that said, I wouldn't try deploying even for 10 users on 2 gigs of RAM with 2 processors.
Well, I'll tell you from a minimal, when you guys are labbing this, and again, from a test, from a 336, it's great to get this, and if you haven't touched it, it's much harder to know what you don't know. You're going to need at least 4 gigs of memory to get things working decent.
Yeah,
just the operating system's going to take a gig, right? So then you've just got, just to get it up and running, there are a lot of pieces, and you've got 2 copies of SQL running, 2 instances of SQL on every Lync server, 2 instances, your local copy and your store copy. So your list and your, that's just a lot. And then your I/O impact, and you're going to notice, wow, this doesn't run very well. Well, it doesn't run very well because you haven't met specs. And that gets back to somebody deploying it and thinking, let's just go try to demo this out, and then blowing up in their face because it's a bad user experience.
Right, or simply just deploying it and having a lot of people jump on and start trying to use it and not really being happy with the results.
Right.
Big change from 2010 to 2013 in virtualization is about that really it's not the half number that we used to see, right? But what we are really seeing is you can deploy standard or enterprise, fully virtualized. There are definitely some requirements in the TechNet articles about this, about what can and can't be done in mixing virtual and physical in your environment.
Right, which just in general you don't want to pool mix because it just doesn't make sense. Your experience will be different from physical to virtual. And the big thing being, there are some requirements like Hyper-V 2012 in order to get the cores we couldn't get before, and that was our big limitation before, right? So there are requirements. It does work completely virtualized, just review the docs.
Yep. Review the docs and make sure you understand that you virtualized it and keep monitoring it and keeping an eye on it. Mm-hmm. So Lync server software, these are just some key things to remember that'll get you to a successful deployment, a more successful environment. Same version of operating system on all your servers. Make sure your operating systems that you're deploying to support your Lync roles. Plan for, you're going to have to recognize what your SQL requirements are and what your SQL planning is. How you're doing mirroring and log recovery and high availability and how disaster recovery. What this speaks to as a more core thing is you kind of have to understand a lot of Lync before you start building.
We have so many dependencies and so many different interactions with so many different moving parts on an existing network or add additions to an existing network. There's a lot to understand and a lot to keep in mind.
Yep.
Has been, and it's even more so now. So.
Most definitely. You need to make sure you understand your AD needs if you're in a locked down Active Directory environment, what your network and what your certificates will support. Do we support RODCs? What IIS version do we need? Right? There's all these little pieces because Lync touches so many things. There's all these things to think about. Clients. There's that little third checkbox there that says, evaluate whether XP and Vista are still deployed.
Because if they are, it's not going to work with a new client.
Right.
Web browsers, no different, right?
Another key here, it's what works in what different web browsers on what different versions of the OS.
Mm-hmm. And platforms, right? So if you're a Mac OS person, what's going to work, what's not going to work?
Yep, most definitely. The planning tool.
Yay.
So the planning tool isn't the topology builder, though, right? The planning tool is a conceptual tool that lets you plug in some of your business requirements that you've gathered and turned into design constraints, and it spits you out a conceptual architecture.
A starting point.
A starting point that you need to understand why you got there and how that meets or doesn't meet your needs.
Even if you think you know what your design is going to be, it's great to put in and dump all your information into the planning tool and see what it thinks. Are you on or you're not on? And then even more so is when I tweak X, let's say it's the number of voice users or the number of total users, what happens? So what does impact the environment so that you have a better understanding of what does and doesn't work in the environment and how things should and shouldn't be.
Yep.
Planning tool is a great place to start or to reevaluate and kind of like solidify, this is my design.
Yep, most definitely. We've got some examples here. This isn't me showing you examples of the output, but if you pull down the Lync planning tool, these are two different deployments that you can plug into the Lync planning tool and see how different the environments get. Right?
Right.
Topology builder.
You have to use it.
Have to use it. Have to use it to build and deploy your environment.
Now, what happens if you're in a 2010, 2013 environment and you've upgraded your schema and your groups and whatnot with 2013? What topology builder do we use now?
Stop using 2010 right away.
That's right.
As soon as you've introduced a 2013 environment, you need to stop using the 2010 version of Topology Builder.
And it's important. It's just you just need to know to do it. It's not like you're losing any functionality or features by using the 2013 against 2010. You just need to use it.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly. This is that little setup process for how Topology Builder works and where it sets up and retrieves and pushes. It hasn't really changed from 2010. It's just another representation of how that happens. Mm-hmm. Description of what it is. It's that graphical tool that lets you interact with and configure what servers in your environment, what servers are playing what roles in your environment.
Right, how you've configured them. And from a test perspective, you need to know what the Topology Builder is.
Yep.
Yeah.
Most
just
definitely.
by name, what does it do? What's its functionality? And that's the importance here.
Yep.
But it has not changed since 2010.
Right. And CMS hasn't really changed since 2010 either. It's still deployed on a central backend. It's still replicated to every Lync server in your environment.
You know, and potentially application-based servers, depending on if you're leveraging the CMS. That could be in a lot of places. It always needs to be in sync. That's about all we've got on CMS.
Yep.
Yeah.
So this is just this idea that we have Your global is your Lync deployment. It describes everything about that Lync deployment. And then you have what data centers is Lync deployed in, and then within those data centers, what pools are deployed within those data centers.
Yeah, and a separation of pools, it's no different than 2010. Number of users may be a factor. It could be communications or rights or user types. It could be, I mean, yeah. Again, the conceptually, it hasn't changed.
Yep. So. Branch office hasn't really changed. We've still got SBAs, and we've still got those functions and features, and it's really the sizing hasn't changed all that much between what's possible in an SBA or an SBS in 2013 versus 2010. Planning for server additions and planning your server infrastructure. This is a lot about what do we need? Are we operating in an environment that has no HA capabilities? It requires no HA. Is it not deployed? I'd argue that most companies require HA, whether they accept that fact or not.
All right. I mean, when you get this goes back to when we're getting the business requirements. The business should dictate this information. The importance and your role will be to illustrate, okay, this is what you said, and sometimes it goes the other way. They want everything, and when you come back with the architecture, say, okay, here's the 50 servers we need to reach your goal. They could very well say, okay, maybe we don't want all that, and where can we size down? Lync 2013 is exactly like 2010, where it's that onion. It's very layered. Yep. We can start with a single front-end server, then go to 3 when we need to expand out. We can have a single edge server, then add multiple edges. So we don't have to do it all at the same time. We can add database mirroring later at a future point. I mean, there really is the ability to add on as needed. Just be clear what's important to the business and meet those business requirements in order to make sure we have a successful rollout.
Yep. The word pool is overused in Lync, in my opinion. We have lots of different types of Lync 2013 pools. We have the Enterprise Edition front-end pool. We have a persistent chat pool, a mediation server pool, a director pool, an edge pool.
Technically, a standard edition is a pool.
Of one.
But it is.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
But there's pools. But it's not water pool, so don't get confused with.
Yeah, don't drop your Lync servers in a pool. They'll behave poorly.
Yes.
This really gets to, if you're on the fence about standard or enterprise, talking about what are those constraints? What are the scaling considerations in that deployment? Can it accommodate failover? Does it have high availability for enterprise voice? Is it scaled more for 5 to 80 to 400,000 users in your environment?
And when we get into the DRHA stuff, we'll slightly talk about how DR can be used as a poor man's HA, but it's not. If you need HA, you need to go enterprise. And that's functionalities, feature-wise, you're going to have the same features in the two sets.
But the end user experience may not be the same. Right. The end user, response to when an incident happens, let's call it.
Okay, and so understanding what's the acceptable downtime, what's the acceptable time to recovery, data loss, all of that comes into play when you have standard edition versus enterprise edition.
Yep, most definitely. Large meetings and persistent chat both put additional constraints on your design and additional sort of things you need to think about in your design.
Yeah, and persistent chat has its maximums of what it can and can't do per pool. So no matter how many servers you throw at it, there's only so much that it can do. So keeping that in mind and knowing, is persistent chat what you want it to do or not to do. Mm-hmm. So.
Yep. We still in Lync 2013 have this idea of up to 1,000 user scaled support for meetings on-prem. Mm-hmm. So last and not least, it shouldn't be thought of as least, but it's really talking about why it's good to put these things into documents and why Visio is really a good tool for you to use. We just described generically what your characteristics of good documentation are, why it's good for you to document things well. Options, right?
I like options.
I know when I'm designing Lync, right, I end up using Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and Visio.
Yeah. Well, it's
right?
same thing. Yeah.
All 4.
Yep, you're using the suite and OneNote because that's where I keep my running notes.
Agreed, but that's my notes.
Yes.
These are documents.
Okay.
So yeah, conceptual and physical designs, embedding those Visio drawings into your Word document so that people don't have to go find a separate document. When you need to run your server and network infrastructure, maybe it should look like this. This is a good layout for a fairly simple Lync environment that describes that we've got some firewalls, we've got the SQL Server, we've got our London deployment, we've got 2 front ends, we've got load balancers, we've got routers, we've got gateways, we've got, BRIs versus PRIs. BRIs is just a British representation of a T1.
Yep.
The firewall, and an MPLS back to that other office. And this, if I got this from somebody who was handing me their Lync infrastructure, I at least know the things I'm playing with.
Exactly, and you know how it was designed.
Yep.
Now, keep in mind it's not always what it is, but that's how it was designed to be.
Yep.
Yeah.
So at this, thank you. That's the end of our first session for the day, and we appreciate you guys tuning in.
Yes, and as promised, it was a longer one than our others will be, but we'll take a short break and we'll be right back to continue. So thanks again.